Trauma doesn't make characters broken, it makes them predictable. Here's how therapists understand trauma and how writers usually get it wrong. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jack Lawrence, award-winning and best-selling mystery writer and former therapist. Today we're going to talk about trauma and how most writers usually get it wrong, how you can do it better so that characters in your book really stand out to the readers. So trauma is not the event that happens. Trauma is the nervous system learning danger, essentially. So how trauma typically shows up, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, it's overreacting, it's emotional shutdown, or what we call stonewalling, where something is just too emotionally strong. You either shut down, stop talking altogether, maybe you walk away, you leave, right? But it's not to better the situation, it's just because you can't emotionally, mentally deal with it. Hypervigilance, or even controlling behaviors, wanting to have control over every aspect because at some point you felt like you had no control and a trauma happened. And so by trying to control everything, it gives you a sense of power that you may have lost, right? And so your characters incorporate these into their traumas because everybody has a trauma of some sort. So now, is your character dramatic or are they protecting themselves? Because that's an important question to ask. Is your character's reactions simply to have them be dramatic and to cause tension and chaos in the scene? Or is there a reason? And that reason generally is probably going to be that they're trying to protect themselves for something, because people don't act rationally for no reason. There's always an underlying cause. Now, if the answer is that they're protecting themselves, which it probably should be, then you have a much deeper character, a much more fulfilling character, and at the end of it, when they reach their goal, the reader is going to feel more rewarded for having stuck with this character. It's almost like a triumph at the end of it. Typically what we see are four main trauma responses. There's fight, right? You run toward the danger. There's anger, control, aggression. You want to reclaim power. There's flight, which is avoidance, running away. Those are the two most common ones that we see, two of the most common ones that we talk about, the two that you're probably most familiar with. But there's also two others. There's freeze, where obviously, as it suggests, the person just freezes. There's numbness, dissociation, not really sure how to deal with the problem, and so a lot of times they just don't. And then there's fawning, where you sink down, you try to people please. There's a real lack of self-assurance, and so you kind of erase yourself from the situation. Most people only do one of these things. They don't cycle through. So whatever your character does, make that their dominant response. If they're a fighter, if they flight, if they freeze, they fawn, whatever it is, stick with that throughout the story whenever they're faced with danger or a trauma response, rather than cycling through different ones throughout the book. Real people don't go through all four cleanly. Now, beyond that, there's trauma memories, which are very fragmented, very sensory-oriented, emotionally charged, and often incredibly inaccurate. This is why unreliable narrators are so popular, because they feel very real, right? One thing I talk to clients who struggle with PTSD about is the analogy of a dog attack. So imagine you're 5, 6 years old and you're playing in the front yard. All of a sudden, this dog is barreling towards you, barking, snarling, growling, and it attacks you, starts biting you. The obvious trauma there is the dog, the attack. So you get older, you grow up, you hate dogs, you're afraid of dogs, you're very worried around dogs, but that's your conscience. right? Your brain zeroed in on the immediate danger, which is this dog. Your unconscious is still picking up on everything else that's around because you still have other senses that are picking things up. You're still hearing things, you're still feeling, still smelling, still seeing. So if a neighbor drives by and they drive a red car, then the next time you see red cars, you might get a little bit anxious, might get a little bit tense, and you don't really know why. You might have the sense to run away. If it's springtime, that smell of a springtime rain could cause you to feel a little bit uneasy. There's things that have happened here, right, that are associated with this trauma that are not obvious. And so when we talk about PTSD or we work through PTSD, of course we address the obvious thing, which is the trauma, the attack, the whatever it was. That's the obvious thing that we address, but then we also try to explore a little bit deeper. What other things cause a response? Because those other things are associated with that trauma just as much, and if they're not addressed, you might get rid of that main thing, but you're still feeling uneasy when these other smaller things happen and you're not sure why. Now, the way that writers generally get this wrong, and they drive me crazy, and anybody who's dealt with trauma, I'm sure drives them crazy too. The first one is that they instantly heal, right? Within the course of a book, there's instant healing. Some people will go years through therapy and treatment, some their entire lifetime without ever healing. And even with a really good therapist, a really good treatment plan, maybe you're doing multiple types of therapy, you're still looking at a year, right, of just getting to a point where you feel normal, not even necessarily all the way through. There's some treatments like EMDR where it's a little bit quicker, but it's still not instant. It's not going to be however long a book is unless your book covers, a year or two or more. So instant healing instantly loses credibility. Your readers are going to know it because most of your readers have had some sort of trauma that they're probably still dealing with, that they had happen years ago. You're going to lose instant credibility. The other thing is trauma as a personality. A lot of time trauma becomes a person's core identity. It becomes a part of who they are, right? It's almost like, who am I outside of this trauma? And that's a really hard question for some people to answer. So incorporating that into your writing to where it becomes a part of who they are, right? Their beliefs, their actions, their decision-making are generally aligned with this trauma. So if they were abandoned as kids, they probably have attachment issues. It's hard for them to trust people. It's hard for them to connect with people. Maybe their general response is to just run away before they get hurt, right? It's all part of their identity and who they are. And so incorporating that into your character's dynamic so that it gives them more life, it gives them more depth, right? They're not just a person who has trauma. They're living this trauma. They're experiencing this trauma all of the time. Another problem is over-explaining the backstory. Readers don't need to know everything, right? Like I said, in therapy, it could take months to years before a person really starts to understand their trauma and the depth of their trauma. A paragraph isn't going to do it justice. A chapter isn't going to do it justice. So the better thing to do is kind of sprinkle clues throughout your book. And it doesn't matter what genre you're writing in, just sprinkle little nuggets of information here and there. You're much better off telling about the trauma through your character's actions, reactions, how they handle relationships. Telling it that way rather than giving a blanketed backstory to this character. Your reader doesn't need to know the backstory. You do, right? And so if you want to write one for yourself, that's one thing. And then understand how your character reacts to these things and how it presents in their life so that then you're sprinkling that information throughout the book. You're giving subtle clues to how they interact with the world around them. And that's going to give them a lot more life, a lot more depth, a lot more relatability, really. Giving that longer backstory isn't going to serve anything to the plot, most likely. Now, in some instances, it might, but I would say the vast majority of books that I've read, very rarely will it serve a purpose. And if it does, then that part doesn't necessarily apply. Another thing that's important to remember is healing is not linear. There is no A to B to C, right? A lot of times it's A to D to B to F, kind of all over the place. Like I mentioned with the dog analogy, there's a lot of different components that happened during that dog attack. And so you're kind of working through all these different things where you're in a situation where your brain is hyper-focused on one thing, and there's so many other things associated with it. Different messages, right? If you feel that you're unsafe in your family, then you feel you're unsafe in a relationship, and then you feel you're unsafe around friends, and you have these different relationships that are sending you the same message. You have a lot of different layers to kind of work through. And so that healing is never going to be a straight line. It's going to be up, down, and it's going to be all over the place. So you have to show regression with your character. Your character is not going to start off broken and by the end of the story be completely healed with just a straight up and down, right? They're going to fall. They're going to hit rock bottom at some point. They're going to come back up. Maybe your character starts at rock bottom and they're on the way up. They're going to fall again. And it just kind of around it goes until they reach whatever their goal is. You have to remember this character has had this trauma for years, and it's probably become a part of their core identity. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. Letting go of that trauma and going for real change is incredibly hard. It's incredibly difficult. And it really undercuts the value of that by 200 pages they've got to figure it out. 300 pages they've got to figure it out, right? Not realistic. The change at the end of the book really should be pretty minimal, but very noticeable, if that makes sense, right? So if there's a situation that happens early in the book where the character just freaks out, they run off, whatever, have a similar situation happen near the end of the book, and their reaction is a little bit different. Maybe they don't run away right off the bat. Maybe they stay and they confront it. Maybe, they do something a little bit different. Not to say that they've healed from that, right? They're still maybe terrified or they still have a negative reaction, but it's not the same as it was in the beginning. It's a little bit different. It's minute, but noticeable. So when you're writing a traumatic scene or a scene where trauma is experienced or a person is, afraid, essentially, there's a lot of different ways you can do that rather than telling the reader that your character is afraid or your character is in danger. Let the body react before there's ever a thought. If you watch, CNN or Fox News and you see people in war zones when they're covering those things, people don't stop and think. If there's a bomb or gunfire, they run. You always act first. Your brain is designed to keep you alive and keep you safe. So when it expresses danger, feels danger, it's not going to stop to analyze the situation. It's going to make you move. You're running away, or you're trying to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. You're not analyzing it. So there shouldn't be very much, if any, thought from your character. There needs to be action. Use triggers very sparingly. Most people in real life struggle to even identify what their triggers are. I've gone multiple sessions with people before they even started to guess what their trigger was. Like I said with the dog, right? The obvious trigger is the dog. Red car could be a trigger. The smell of a spring rain could be a trigger. The mailman could be a trigger, right? If he's sitting there yelling and it's causing you to freak out a little bit more as this dog's running to you. So use them sparingly because your character probably doesn't know what their triggers are. And they aren't going to have everything be a trigger. Focus on avoidance rather than flashbacks. Flashbacks are great. They can serve a great purpose. I use them in several of my books, but they have to serve a purpose. And to draw your reader in, to make it more real and relatable, because they've probably experienced this, they don't think back, right? Like I said at the beginning of this list, there's action before thought. So they aren't going to be thinking of a flashback that reminds them of this situation. They're going to have a natural, automatic response. Their body tensing up, they're sweating, their heart rate picks up. There's an action before the thought kicks in. So maybe there's avoidance, right? They're avoiding the situation that makes them uncomfortable. Flashbacks can feel like filler to readers if they're not perfectly placed. So those subtle clues and hints that you give through the avoidance and different behaviors are going to be a lot more telling than just this flashback. And it's going to draw the reader in to make them feel like they're part of this character. So if you feel like you got something out of this video, like, share, and subscribe so that you can keep up to date and get more psychological insight into your writing to make your book even more believable.